The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Windsor Castle as 10-year-old Prince George made his way through the ancient stone corridors. Unlike most children his age who would be rushing to breakfast, George walked slowly, his small hands carefully carrying a tray laden with tea and biscuits. The young prince had developed an unusual habit that puzzled many of the palace staff, but warmed their hearts nonetheless. Royal Guard Thomas Mitchell stood at his post near the East Wing entrance, his red uniform pristine despite having been on duty since dawn. At 45 years old, Thomas had served the royal family for over 20 years, but, lately, his shoulders seemed to carry more than just the weight of his ceremonial rifle. Unknown to most, Thomas had been struggling with personal difficulties that made each day feel longer than the last. His wife Sarah had been battling a serious illness for months, and their young daughter Emma often asked why Daddy looked so sad. The medical bills were mounting, and, despite his loyal service, Thomas found himself working extra shifts just to make ends meet. The stress was beginning to show on his weathered face, though he maintained his professional composure as always. Prince George approached the guard station with the same gentle smile he wore every morning. The other guards had grown accustomed to this routine, but Thomas was relatively new to this particular post and hadn't yet witnessed the young prince's daily ritual. George carefully set the tray down on a nearby ledge and looked up at the tall guard with genuine curiosity. "Good morning, sir," George said politely, his voice carrying the proper pronunciation instilled by years of royal tutoring, yet somehow retaining the innocent charm of childhood. "I noticed you've been standing here for quite a while. Would you like some tea? Cook made extra biscuits this morning, and they're still warm." Thomas blinked in surprise, unsure of the proper protocol. In all his years of service, he had never been directly addressed by such a young member of the royal family, let alone offered refreshments. He glanced around nervously, wondering if this was some sort of test or if other guards were watching to see how he would respond. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas stammered, immediately standing even straighter if that were possible. "That's very kind of you, but I couldn't possibly." "Please," George interrupted gently, his young face showing a maturity beyond his years. "You look tired. My grandmother always says that a cup of tea can solve almost any problem, and if it can't solve it, at least it makes you feel better while you think about solutions." The sincerity in the boy's voice caught Thomas off guard. Here was a child who could have anything he wanted, yet he was concerned about a guard he barely knew. Thomas had heard stories about the younger royals being taught about duty and service, but seeing it firsthand was something entirely different. George poured the tea with the careful concentration of someone who had been taught proper etiquette, but was still learning. A few drops splashed onto the saucer, and he looked up apologetically. "Sorry, I'm still practicing. Father says steady hands come with time." "You're doing perfectly well, Your Highness," Thomas found himself saying, his formal tone softening slightly. There was something about the boy's earnest effort that reminded him of his own daughter when she tried to help in the kitchen. As George handed him the teacup, their eyes met for a brief moment. In that instant, Thomas saw not a future king, but simply a kind child who noticed when someone seemed troubled. The warmth of the gesture penetrated deeper than the warmth of the tea, reaching a part of Thomas's heart that had been cold with worry for months. "Do you have children?" George asked, settling himself on a nearby stone bench that had probably stood in that spot for centuries. His question was asked with the genuine interest that children often show before they learn to make small talk. Thomas hesitated. Personal conversations with royalty were certainly not covered in his training manual. Yet something about the boy's open, expectant expression made it impossible to give a formal, dismissive answer. "Yes, Your Highness. A daughter about your age." "What's her name?" George asked, taking a small bite of biscuit and swinging his legs from the bench. "Emma, Your Highness." "That's a lovely name. Does she like school?" "I sometimes find lessons a bit difficult, especially mathematics. Numbers seem to jump around on the page sometimes." George's confession was made with the same seriousness that he might discuss matters of state, making Thomas suppress a small smile. "She does enjoy school, Your Highness, when she's able to attend." The words slipped out before Thomas could stop them, and he immediately regretted revealing anything about his family's struggles. George's expression grew more serious, his young face showing concern that seemed almost ancient in its depth. "Is she ill?" Thomas found himself in an impossible position. He couldn't lie to a member of the royal family, but discussing personal matters while on duty was highly inappropriate. Yet the genuine worry in the boy's eyes made it difficult to deflect the question entirely. "She's been staying home more often lately to help her mother, Your Highness." George nodded solemnly, as if this explanation made perfect sense to him. In his short life, he had already learned about duty, about putting others' needs before your own desires. The concept of a child helping her family during difficult times resonated with his understanding of responsibility. "That's very good of her," George said seriously. "Family is the most important thing, isn't it? Grandmother always says that everything else can wait when family needs you." Thomas felt something tighten in his chest. This child, who lived in a palace surrounded by luxury, understood something that many adults struggled with. The simple acceptance in George's voice, the lack of judgment or pity, somehow made Thomas feel less alone with his burdens. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds being the distant chirping of birds in the castle gardens and the soft clink of Thomas's teacup against the saucer. George seemed content to simply share the quiet moment, asking nothing more than he had already given. As footsteps echoed from down the corridor, George quickly stood up, smoothing his clothes and adopting a more formal posture. Thomas recognized the approach of other palace staff and immediately returned to his rigid guard stance. "Thank you for the tea, Your Highness," Thomas said formally as a palace aide approached. "You're very welcome," George replied with equal formality, but his eyes held a warmth that spoke of the connection they had just shared. "Perhaps we'll have another chance to chat soon." As George walked away with the aide, Thomas found himself standing a little straighter, not from duty this time, but from something that felt suspiciously like hope. The simple kindness of a 10-year-old boy had somehow made the weight on his shoulders feel a little lighter. 3 days had passed since the tea incident, and Thomas Mitchell found himself looking forward to his morning shift in a way he hadn't experienced in months. Each time he took his position at the East Wing entrance, he couldn't help but glance down the corridor, wondering if the young prince would appear with his thoughtful offering again. On this particular morning, the castle seemed quieter than usual. The autumn air carried a crisp chill that made Thomas grateful for his heavy uniform, though he knew he would be standing motionless for hours regardless of the weather. He had been at his post for nearly 2 hours when he heard the familiar sound of small footsteps approaching. Prince George appeared around the corner, but this time he carried something different. Instead of a tea tray, he held a carefully wrapped package and wore an expression of excited anticipation mixed with nervous uncertainty. His steps were quicker than usual, suggesting he had something important on his mind. "Good morning, Thomas," George said, and the guard noticed immediately that the boy had dropped the formal "sir" from his greeting. The use of his first name felt both surprising and oddly natural. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," Thomas replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite his curiosity about the package. George looked around to ensure they were alone, then stepped closer to the guard's position. "I've been thinking about what you said, about Emma helping her mother. It made me remember something important that I wanted to share with you." The young prince's seriousness was evident, and Thomas found himself leaning slightly forward, drawn into whatever the boy was about to reveal. "When I was 7, George continued, my great-grandmother became very ill. Everyone in the palace was worried, but they tried to hide it from me and my siblings. I could tell something was wrong because the adults would stop talking when I entered a room, and there were more doctors visiting than usual." Thomas listened intently, struck by how the boy spoke about such a significant event with remarkable clarity and emotional intelligence. "I felt helpless," George admitted, his young voice carrying a weight that seemed too heavy for someone his age. "I wanted to do something, anything, to help. But what can a 7-year-old do in such a situation? I couldn't make her better. I couldn't take away the sadness from my parents' faces." George paused, looking down at the package in his hands. "My mother found me crying in the library one day. She sat with me and explained that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply show that we care. She said that love and kindness have their own kind of magic, especially when they come from an unexpected place." The boy's words struck Thomas deeply. Here was a child who understood loss, worry, and the feeling of powerlessness that comes when someone you care about is suffering. Despite living in a world of privilege, George had experienced the same emotions that kept Thomas awake at night. "That's when I started bringing tea to the guards and staff," George continued. "Mother suggested it, actually. She said that taking care of others when we're worried about someone we love can help us feel useful again. It doesn't fix the big problems, but it creates small moments of connection." Thomas felt his throat tighten slightly. The boy's words resonated with a truth he hadn't been able to articulate himself. In his worry about Sarah and Emma, he had indeed felt powerless, isolated by circumstances he couldn't control. George extended the wrapped package toward Thomas. I know this might not be appropriate, and if it isn't, please just tell me. But I made something for Emma. I thought, maybe if she knows that someone else understands about helping family, she might feel less alone. Thomas stared at the package, unsure of how to respond. Accepting gifts from royalty was certainly against protocol, but refusing what was clearly a heartfelt gesture seemed equally wrong. Your Royal Highness, I couldn't possibly. Please, George interrupted softly. It's nothing expensive or fancy. I made it myself during art class. My teacher, Mrs. Henderson, helped me with the details, but the idea was mine. The sincerity in the boy's voice made refusal seem impossible. Thomas carefully accepted the package, noting how light it was. What is it, if I may ask? A bookmark, George said, his cheeks flushing slightly with embarrassment. I know it's silly, but I thought if Emma likes to read like I do, she might use it. I painted it with watercolors, and I wrote something on it that I hope might help her feel strong when things are difficult. Thomas felt something break open in his chest. This child, who would one day be king, had spent his art class time creating something for a girl he had never met, simply because he understood what it felt like to worry about family. I also wrote a letter, George added, pulling a sealed envelope from his pocket. It's not about royal things or anything formal. I just wanted to tell her that I think she's brave for helping her mother, and that sometimes when I'm worried about people I love, I try to think about all the good things in the world. It helps sometimes. Thomas accepted the letter with hands that weren't quite steady. In all his years of military service and royal duty, he had never been so moved by such a simple gesture. The fact that this boy had thought about Emma, had taken time to create something specifically for her, seemed almost impossible to believe. Your Royal Highness, Thomas began, his voice rougher than usual. This is incredibly kind of you. She'll be amazed. We could never have imagined. You don't need to say anything, George said gently. I just hope it helps a little. And Thomas? You don't have to call me Your Royal Highness when it's just us talking. My friends at school call me George, and I think of you as a friend now. The word friend hung in the air between them, carrying a significance that transcended their vastly different positions in life. A future king had just declared a palace guard to be his friend, and somehow it felt completely natural. That means a great deal to me, George, Thomas said, using the boy's name for the first time. It felt strange on his tongue, but also right in a way he couldn't explain. George's smile brightened the entire corridor. Will you tell me how Emma likes the bookmark? I was thinking that maybe, if it's allowed, she could write back to me. I don't get many letters from children my own age who aren't related to me or from other royal families. Thomas realized that this extraordinary child was not just giving something to Emma. He was also revealing his own loneliness, his desire for connections that weren't based on protocol or political considerations. I think Emma would be thrilled to have a pen pal, Thomas said, and he meant every word. Though I should warn you, she's quite chatty once she gets started. She might write you very long letters about books and her pet hamster and whatever else comes to mind. That sounds perfect, George said with genuine enthusiasm. I love long letters. They're like having a proper conversation, except you can take time to think about what you want to say. As they talked, neither noticed the figure watching from a shadowed alcove further down the corridor. The queen had been making her morning walk through the castle when she heard voices and had paused to observe the interaction between her great-grandson and the guard. What she witnessed filled her with a pride so profound that she had to lean against the wall for support. Here was her great-grandson, displaying the very qualities she hoped to instill in the next generation of royals: genuine compassion, the ability to see beyond social barriers, and the understanding that true leadership comes from service to others. But more than that, she saw a young boy who was naturally kind, who acted from his heart rather than from duty or expectation. The queen quietly retreated, knowing that this moment was too precious to interrupt. She would speak with George later, to praise him for his kindness, and to ensure that this friendship would be supported rather than discouraged by palace protocol. As George prepared to leave for his morning lessons, he turned back to Thomas one more time. I hope your wife feels better soon. Sometimes when people are ill, they worry about being a burden to their families. Maybe you could tell her that taking care of someone we love is never a burden. It's actually a privilege. With those words, spoken with the wisdom of someone far beyond his years, Prince George walked away, leaving Thomas holding gifts for his daughter and carrying hope in his heart for the first time in months. That evening, Thomas Mitchell sat at his kitchen table in his modest flat in Windsor, holding Prince George's gifts with hands that trembled slightly from emotion rather than exhaustion. His wife, Sarah, lay resting on the sofa nearby, wrapped in a warm blanket, while their daughter Emma worked on homework at the other end of the table. The small flat was a world away from the grandeur of Windsor Castle, with its mismatched furniture and well-worn carpet, but it was filled with the kind of love that no amount of money could buy. Sarah's illness had brought financial strain, but it had also shown Thomas just how precious their small family was. "Emma, sweetheart," Thomas called softly to his daughter. "Could you come here for a moment? I have something special to show you." 10-year-old Emma looked up from her mathematics homework, her face lighting up with curiosity. She had her father's earnest brown eyes and her mother's gentle smile, though lately, that smile had been shadowed by worry beyond her years. Like many children dealing with family illness, Emma had grown up faster than she should have, taking on responsibilities that most children her age never had to consider. "What is it, Dad?" Emma asked, settling into the chair beside him. She noticed immediately that her father seemed different tonight. There was something lighter about his expression, a spark that had been missing for months. "Today at work, I met someone very special," Thomas began, choosing his words carefully. "A young boy about your age who heard about you and wanted to send you something." Emma's eyes widened with interest. She didn't have many friends at school anymore, since she had missed so many days helping care for her mother. The idea that someone unknown had thought of her was both exciting and puzzling. Thomas handed her the carefully wrapped bookmark first. He made this for you himself, during his art class. With the careful attention that children give to special gifts, Emma unwrapped the bookmark. What she revealed was a beautiful watercolor painting of a garden scene, with delicate flowers in soft blues and purples, and a graceful butterfly resting on a blooming rose. But it was the words painted in careful script along the bottom that made her catch her breath. For Emma, being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right even when you are scared. You are braver than you know. Emma stared at the bookmark for a long moment, her finger tracing the painted flowers. "Dad, this is beautiful. But I don't understand. Who would make this for me? How do they know I'm scared?" Sarah, who had been listening from the sofa, slowly sat up with interest. "Thomas, what's this about?" Thomas took a deep breath and began to tell them about Prince George, about the morning tea visits, their conversations, and the boy's remarkable kindness. He watched their faces change from disbelief to amazement as he described how the future king had taken time to create something specifically for Emma. "Prince George," Emma whispered, her voice filled with awe. "The real Prince George? He made this for me." "There's more," Thomas said gently, handing her the sealed letter. "He wrote this for you as well." Emma's hands shook slightly as she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was careful and clear, obviously written by someone who had been taught proper penmanship, but was still young enough to occasionally struggle with letter formation. The letter read, "Dear Emma, my name is George, and your father told me about you. I wanted to write because I think you might understand something that not many children our age understand, what it's like to worry about people we love. When my great-grandmother was very sick, I felt scared and helpless. I wanted to do something important to help her get better, but I couldn't. My mother explained to me that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply be there for the people we love, and that taking care of others is one of the strongest things anyone can do. Your father says you help take care of your mother when she's not feeling well. I think that makes you incredibly brave and strong. I know it's probably hard sometimes, and maybe you feel tired or worried. I wanted you to know that someone understands, and that I think you're doing something really important. I love to read books, especially adventure stories, and books about history. Do you like to read? If you do, I hope the bookmark I made will remind you that you're the hero of your own story, and heroes always find a way through difficult times. If you would like to write back to me, I would love to hear from you. I don't have many friends who understand what it's like to worry about family, and I think we might have a lot to talk about. You could tell me about your favorite books, or your school, or your mother, or anything else you want to share. I hope your mother feels better soon, and I hope you remember how special you are. Your friend, George. P.S. My father says that when things are hard, it helps to think about 3 good things that happened each day, even if they're small things like seeing a funny bird or tasting something delicious. Maybe you could try that too. By the time Emma finished reading, tears were streaming down her face, but they were tears of wonder rather than sadness. She looked up at her parents with an expression of pure amazement. "He called me brave," she whispered, "and he wants to be my friend." Sarah had tears in her eyes as well. The kindness of this young prince, who had noticed their family's struggle and responded with such genuine care, was almost overwhelming. "Thomas," she said softly, "how is this real? How did this happen?" Thomas reached over and took his wife's hand. "I think it happened because our daughter has been so strong through all of this, and somehow that strength caught the attention of someone who understands what strength really means." Emma was studying the bookmark again, holding it up to catch the light from the table lamp. "The butterfly is beautiful," she said quietly. And the words, "Dad, does he really think I'm brave? Because sometimes I don't feel brave at all. Sometimes I feel scared and angry that Mom is sick, and that everything is different now." "Oh, sweetheart," Sarah said, motioning for Emma to come sit beside her on the sofa. "Being brave doesn't mean you're never scared or angry. It means you keep going even when you feel those things. And you have kept going, helping me, taking care of yourself, keeping up with school as much as possible. That's exactly what being brave looks like." Emma curled up next to her mother, still clutching the bookmark and letter. "Can I really write back to him? What would I say to a prince?" Thomas smiled, the first genuinely happy smile his family had seen from him in months. "I think you should write to him exactly like you would write to any friend. He seemed to want a real friendship, not something formal or stuffy. Tell him about your favorite books. Ask him about his life. Share whatever feels right to share." "I want to thank him," Emma said decisively. "And I want to tell him about the story I'm writing. It's about a girl who discovers she has the power to heal people with her kindness. Do you think he might like to read it?" "I think he would love to read it," Thomas said, and he meant it completely. As the evening went on, Emma sat at the kitchen table composing her reply to Prince George. She wrote about her favorite books, asked about his school and his hobbies, and shared the beginning of her story about the healing girl. But, mostly, she wrote about how much his kindness meant to her and how it made her feel less alone during a difficult time. "Dad," Emma said as she sealed her letter, "will you tell Prince George something for me when you see him tomorrow?" "Of course, sweetheart. What would you like me to tell him?" Emma thought for a moment, her young face serious with concentration. "Tell him that his kindness is like magic. It made our whole family feel stronger tonight. And tell him that I think he's going to be the best king ever, because he knows how to see people who need kindness, and he isn't afraid to give it to them." Thomas felt his heart swell with pride for his daughter, who at 10 years old understood something profound about leadership and compassion. Tomorrow, he would deliver Emma's message to a young prince who was learning the same lessons. And somehow their unlikely friendship would continue to grow, built on the foundation of genuine care and understanding that transcends all social boundaries. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical autumn weather that usually made Thomas feel more tired than usual. But today was different. As he walked through the castle gates to begin his shift, he carried Emma's carefully sealed letter in his breast pocket, and, for the first time in months, he found himself looking forward to the day ahead. Thomas had barely settled into his position at the East Wing entrance when he heard rapid footsteps approaching. Prince George appeared around the corner, but instead of his usual measured pace, he was practically bouncing with excitement. His cheeks were flushed from running, and his usually perfectly combed hair was slightly disheveled. "Thomas," George called out, forgetting completely about formal protocols in his enthusiasm. "I've been thinking about Emma all night. Do you think she liked the bookmark? Did she read the letter? Will you tell me everything she said?" The young prince's obvious excitement was infectious. Thomas found himself smiling despite the early hour and the dreary weather. "She loved both the bookmark and the letter, George. In fact, she has something for you as well." George's eyes went wide with surprise and delight. "She does? Really? What is it?" Thomas pulled Emma's letter from his pocket and handed it to the boy. "She spent all evening writing this for you. She was very serious about it, checking her spelling multiple times and rewriting parts to make sure they said exactly what she wanted to say." George accepted the letter with the reverence usually reserved for important state documents. His hands were actually trembling slightly as he opened the envelope, and Thomas realized that this correspondence meant as much to the young prince as it did to his daughter. As George read Emma's letter, his expression changed from excitement to wonder to something approaching joy. Thomas watched the boy's face light up as he read about Emma's favorite books and her story about the healing girl. "She wants to be a writer," George said softly, looking up from the letter with amazement. "She's writing stories about helping people, and she asked if I would like to read them. Thomas, she's invited me to be part of her creative world." There was something profound in the way George spoke those words, as if he understood the significance of being trusted with someone's dreams and imagination. "She also said," George continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, She said that my kindness is like magic, and that it made her whole family feel stronger. She thinks I'll be a good king because I'm not afraid to be kind to people who need it. Thomas watched the young prince struggle with emotions that seemed too big for his 10-year-old frame. For all the formal education and royal training George received, nothing had prepared him for the simple power of genuine friendship and appreciation from a peer who saw him as just a person, not a title. "George," Thomas said gently, "Emma wanted me to tell you something else. She said that last night was the first time in months that our family felt hopeful together. Your letter reminded us that there are still good things happening in the world, even when life feels difficult." George was quiet for a long moment, staring down at Emma's letter. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes, but they were tears of happiness rather than sadness. "I want to do something for her," George said suddenly, his voice filled with determination. "Something bigger than letters." "Thomas, what does Emma need most right now?" The question caught Thomas off guard. He had expected the friendship to remain at the level of letters and small gestures, but George's question suggested something more significant. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas began, automatically reverting to formal address in his surprise. "George," the boy corrected firmly. "We're friends, remember? And friends help each other when they can." Thomas took a deep breath, considering how to answer honestly without taking advantage of the boy's generous spirit. "The truth is, George, what Emma needs most is for her mother to get better. But since that's not something anyone can promise, what would help most is knowing that she's not alone, that there are people who understand and care about her situation." George nodded thoughtfully, as if he had expected this answer. "But there must be practical things too. Things that would make daily life easier for your family while your wife recovers." Thomas hesitated. The boy's obvious desire to help was touching, but he couldn't bring himself to discuss their financial struggles with a child, even a child who happened to be a prince. "George, your friendship and kindness are already more than we ever could have hoped for, Thomas," George interrupted, and his voice carried a note of gentle authority that hinted at the king he would one day become. "My grandmother has taught me that true friendship means being honest with each other. If you were in my position and I was in yours, wouldn't you want to help in whatever way you could?" The question was simple, but it cut straight to the heart of the matter. Thomas realized that by refusing to be honest about their needs, he might actually be denying George the opportunity to experience the joy of truly helping someone. "The truth is," Thomas said slowly, "Emma has missed a lot of school because we can't always afford childcare when I'm working and Sarah needs help. Emma insists on staying home to help her mother, and while I'm proud of her dedication to family, I worry about her education." George listened intently, his young face showing the kind of focused attention usually reserved for important meetings. "What if Emma could continue learning even when she needs to be at home? Would that help?" "It would help tremendously," Thomas admitted. "But private tutoring is expensive, and the local schools are overwhelmed. What if I could arrange something?" George interrupted, his excitement building again. "Not because I'm a prince, but because I'm Emma's friend and I want to help. What if we could find a way for Emma to have access to excellent teachers without it being a financial burden on your family?" Thomas stared at the boy, amazed by his problem-solving instincts and his genuine desire to make a difference. "George, that would be incredible, but I couldn't ask you to." "You're not asking," George said with a smile. "I'm offering, and I think I know just the person who might help us figure this out." Before Thomas could respond, they heard footsteps approaching from down the corridor. But instead of stepping away or reverting to formal behavior, George stood straighter and smiled confidently. "Grandmother," George called out as Queen Elizabeth II appeared around the corner, accompanied by one of her ladies-in-waiting. Thomas immediately stood at full attention, but the Queen gestured for him to remain at ease. Her eyes moved between George and Thomas with obvious interest. "Good morning, George," the Queen said warmly. "I see you're having your morning chat with Mr. Mitchell." "Yes, grandmother, and I'm so glad you're here because I wanted to talk to you about something important." George's voice carried a confidence that surprised Thomas. "I've made a friend, and I think there might be a way for our family to help her family with something important." The Queen's eyebrows raised slightly, but her expression showed interest rather than disapproval. "Is that so? Tell me about this friend of yours." As George began to explain about Emma and her situation, Thomas realized that he was witnessing something extraordinary. A 10-year-old boy was advocating for a family he had never met, speaking to the Queen of England with the passion and conviction of someone who truly understood what it meant to use privilege for good. The Queen listened without interruption, her expression growing more thoughtful as George spoke. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, studying both her great-grandson and the guard who had clearly made such an impact on him. George, the Queen said finally, what you're describing sounds like an excellent opportunity for us to practice the kind of quiet service that makes the monarchy meaningful. Let me speak with some people about educational resources that might be available. But I want you to understand that if we do this, it must be done properly, with dignity for all involved, and without any suggestion of charity or pity. George's face lit up with understanding. Yes, grandmother. Emma is brilliant and strong. She doesn't need charity. She just needs opportunity. The Queen smiled, and Thomas saw in that smile the same warmth and intelligence that shone in her great-grandson's eyes. Exactly right. Mr. Mitchell, would you be willing to discuss some possibilities with my private secretary? I believe we might be able to arrange something that would benefit Emma's education while honoring her family's dignity. Thomas felt overwhelmed by the generosity and understanding being shown by both the Queen and Prince George. Your Majesty, I don't know what to say. This is far more than we ever could have imagined. Say nothing yet, the Queen advised kindly. Let us explore what's possible first. But I want you to know that I'm very impressed by the friendship you and your daughter have formed with my great-grandson. It's clear that you both understand what genuine connection looks like. As the Queen prepared to continue her morning walk, she turned back to George one more time. I'm proud of you for seeing beyond yourself and caring about others who need kindness. This is exactly the kind of thinking that will serve you well in the future. After the Queen left, George turned back to Thomas with barely contained excitement. I think we're going to be able to help Emma, he said happily. And the best part is, grandmother understands that this isn't about us doing something for you. It's about friends helping friends, which is what people should do for each other regardless of who they are. Thomas looked down at this remarkable child who was teaching him about friendship, dignity, and the proper use of power, and felt profoundly grateful that their paths had crossed. Emma was about to gain not just educational opportunities, but a friend who would help her understand her own worth and potential in ways that would shape her entire future. 2 weeks later, the transformation in the Mitchell family was remarkable. Emma sat at the kitchen table that had become her new classroom, working with Mrs. Catherine Webb, a retired teacher who had once taught at some of England's finest schools. The Queen's private secretary had arranged for Mrs. Webb to provide Emma with personalized tutoring 3 days a week, presented not as charity, but as part of a royal educational outreach program for exceptional students dealing with family circumstances. Emma flourished under Mrs. Webb's patient guidance. The older woman had immediately recognized Emma's quick mind and creative spirit, and had tailored lessons that challenged her while remaining sensitive to her family situation. More importantly, Mrs. Webb treated Emma with the same respect she would give any gifted student, never once making her feel like an object of pity. Your essay about friendship across social boundaries is quite sophisticated for someone your age, Mrs. Webb told Emma as they reviewed her latest assignment. You've clearly given deep thought to how genuine connections can form between people from very different backgrounds. Emma smiled, thinking of her correspondence with Prince George, which had grown into a rich exchange of ideas, stories, and mutual support. I think when people care about the same things, like helping others and being kind, their backgrounds don't matter as much as you might think. Meanwhile, at Windsor Castle, Thomas stood at his usual post with a sense of contentment he hadn't felt in years. Sarah's health had been gradually improving, partly due to reduced stress now that Emma's education was secure, and partly due to a new treatment program that their doctor had recommended. The family's financial situation had stabilized now that Thomas no longer needed to work extra shifts to afford tutoring, and Emma was thriving academically while still being able to help care for her mother when needed. Prince George approached with his customary morning greeting, but today he carried something special, a bound booklet with a carefully designed cover. Thomas, George called out excitedly. I have something amazing to show you. Emma's story about the healing girl. She finished it, and, with Mrs. Webb's help, she turned it into a proper little book with illustrations and everything. Thomas accepted the booklet with amazement. The cover showed a watercolor illustration of a young girl surrounded by soft, golden light, her hands extended toward various people who appeared to be receiving comfort from her presence. The title, written in Emma's careful script, read, The Girl Who Healed Hearts, a story about the magic of kindness. She sent me the first copy, George continued, practically vibrating with enthusiasm. She dedicated it to my friend George, who taught me that kindness is the most powerful magic of all. Thomas, she's incredibly talented. Mrs. Webb says Emma has a natural gift for storytelling. Thomas opened the booklet and began reading. Emma had indeed created something special, a story about a young girl who discovers that her acts of kindness have the power to heal not just physical ailments, but emotional wounds, loneliness, and despair. The parallels to their own experience were clear, but the story transcended their personal situation to become something universal about the power of compassion. George, Thomas said, looking up from the story, this is extraordinary. Emma must be so proud. She is, and she should be, George replied. But you know what made me happiest about receiving this? In her letter, Emma wrote that she's been thinking about becoming a teacher when she grows up, like Mrs. Webb. She wants to help other children who are dealing with difficult situations. And she says she learned about the importance of education by seeing how much it means when someone believes in your potential. The young prince paused, his expression growing more serious. Thomas, I've been thinking a lot about leadership lately. My tutors teach me about policy and protocol and the history of monarchy, but watching you and Emma and your family has taught me something different. I've learned that real leadership isn't about having power over people. It's about using whatever advantages you have to lift others up. Thomas felt a profound sense of pride, not just for his own family, but for this remarkable boy who was learning lessons that would serve him well as a future king. George, what you've done for Emma, for all of us, it's shown her that she matters, that her dreams and abilities are important. That kind of encouragement can change the entire direction of someone's life. But that's exactly my point, George said earnestly. I didn't really do anything extraordinary. I just paid attention to someone who needed kindness, and I used resources that were available to me to help. Anyone in my position could have done the same thing. They just have to choose to see beyond themselves. As they talked, neither noticed the small group of palace staff who had paused in their duties to observe the conversation. Word of Prince George's friendship with the guard and his help for the guard's family had spread quietly through the castle. Rather than gossip or criticism, the story had inspired admiration for the young prince's character and for the way the queen had supported his instincts toward service. Head housekeeper Margaret Price watched from a respectful distance and smiled to herself. In her 30 years at the palace, she had seen many royal children grow up, but Prince George's natural empathy and his understanding of how to use privilege responsibly gave her great hope for the future of the monarchy. Mrs. Price called one of the younger staff members. Is it really true that Prince George arranged for tutoring for the guard's daughter? What I know, Margaret replied carefully, is that when good people recognize other good people, beautiful things can happen, and that young prince has a gift for seeing the best in others. Back at the guard post, George was pulling another item from his pocket, an official-looking envelope with the royal seal. Thomas, I have one more thing for you, George said, his voice taking on a more formal tone. This is from grandmother, but I asked if I could deliver it personally. Thomas accepted the envelope with curiosity and some trepidation. Official communications from the Queen were rare and usually significant. Inside was a letter written in the Queen's distinctive hand. Mr. Mitchell, it has come to my attention that your service to the Crown has been exemplary during a period of personal difficulty for your family. Your dedication to duty while managing significant challenges at home demonstrates the kind of character that we value highly in those who serve the royal family. Additionally, your daughter Emma has impressed her tutor, Mrs. Webb, with her exceptional academic ability and mature understanding of service to others. Mrs. Webb has recommended Emma for a scholarship program that provides educational support through university for students who show both academic promise and strength of character. If your family is interested in this opportunity, please contact my private secretary to discuss the details. This scholarship is awarded based on merit and need, and Emma's qualifications make her an excellent candidate. I also want you to know that your friendship with my great-grandson has been a source of great joy for him and great pride for me. Watching George learn about genuine connection and service through your family has been one of his most valuable education experiences. With appreciation for your service and best wishes for your family's continued health and happiness, Elizabeth R. Thomas read the letter twice, hardly believing what he was seeing. Emma's educational future was not just secure through her current tutoring. She now had the opportunity for support through university, based on her own abilities and character. George, Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion, this is incredible. Emma's entire future has just opened up. She deserves it, George said simply. Mrs. Webb says Emma is one of the brightest students she's ever worked with, and her story about the healing girl shows that she understands something important about using abilities to help others. That's exactly the kind of person who should be supported. Thomas looked at this extraordinary child who had somehow become central to his family's life, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. But, more than gratitude, he felt a deep respect for the way George had approached their friendship, with genuine care, practical help, and always with attention to dignity and equality. George, Thomas said, I want you to know that you've not only helped Emma and our family, you've taught us all something about what it means to be truly noble. And I don't mean noble because of titles or birth. I mean noble in character and spirit. George smiled, but then his expression grew thoughtful. Thomas, can I tell you something? This friendship has taught me just as much. Before I met you and Emma, I sometimes worried about whether I would be able to connect with people whose lives are different from mine. You've shown me that real friendships are possible when people are honest with each other and when they care about each other's well-being. As their conversation continued, other members of the castle staff began to take notice of what was happening at Thomas's post. But instead of interrupting or discouraging the interaction, many found themselves inspired by the example of genuine connection they witnessed. Young footman James Morrison, who had been feeling homesick and isolated since starting his position at the palace, watched Prince George's easy friendship with Thomas and realized that human connection was possible even in the formal environment of royal service. Kitchen assistant Mary Thompson, who had been struggling with confidence issues, saw how Prince George treated everyone with equal respect and kindness, and began to understand that a person's worth wasn't determined by their position or status. Over the following months, the culture at Windsor Castle subtly shifted. Prince George's example of seeing beyond social barriers and reaching out to those who needed kindness created a ripple effect throughout the staff. People began to look out for each other more, to notice when colleagues were struggling, and to offer help in practical ways. The young prince's friendship with Thomas Mitchell and his support for Emma's education became a quiet legend within the palace walls, not as a story about royal charity, but as an example of what becomes possible when people choose to see each other as full human beings worthy of care and respect. Years later, when Emma Mitchell graduated from university with honors and began her career as an educator specializing in supporting children from challenging backgrounds, she would often think about the bookmark and letter that had first shown her that her struggles were seen and valued by someone who understood. And when Prince George eventually took on greater royal responsibilities, he would carry with him the lessons learned from a friendship that had taught him the true meaning of service and leadership. The friendship that began with a simple offer of morning tea had grown into something that changed lives, influenced an institution, and demonstrated that the most powerful force in human experience is not authority or wealth, but genuine kindness offered from one person to another with no expectation of return.